The night my aunt handed me over like a debt receipt. It was raining so hard the gutters overflow into the sidewalk, and nobody could hear me scream. Not that I screamed. I'd learned by then that screaming only made her feel powerful. Her name was Renata, not mine. I mean my aunt's name. The woman who had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. People in the neighborhood called her generous for taking me in. She called it a sacrifice, usually right before she reminded me of exactly how much that sacrifice had cost her over the years. The electric bills, the groceries, the tuition for the community college I'd attended on a partial scholarship, which she somehow counted as her expense, even though she hadn't paid $1 of it. By the time I was 26, Renata had catalogued every cent she'd ever spent on me. She kept an actual notebook. I'd seen it once, left open on the kitchen table. Columns of dates and amounts, neat and precise, the way only someone who planned to collect eventually would bother to keep records. I worked as a bookkeeper for a dry cleaning chain in South Chicago. 3 locations, messy accounts, the kind of job where you see everything wrong with a business and have no authority to fix any of it. I was good at it. Numbers have always made sense to me in a way that people never quite did. They don't lie, they don't shift the story depending on who's watching. A column either balances or it doesn't. My name is Odalys. I know, unusual. My mother picked it. Renata always said it like it embarrassed her. The night it happened was a Thursday in November. I came home to find 2 men I'd never seen before sitting at Renata's kitchen table, and my aunt standing at the counter with her arms crossed the way she always stood when she'd already made a decision, and was just waiting for you to catch up to it. "Oddie," she said, using the nickname she knew I hated. "Sit down." I didn't sit. I put my bag on the counter and looked at the 2 men. One was older, maybe 50, with the kind of stillness that wasn't calm but was something colder than calm. The other was younger, just sitting there with his phone, barely paying attention, which somehow made him more unsettling than the older one. "What is this?" I said. "You know I've been having trouble," Renata said. "It's the salon." I knew. She'd opened a nail salon 3 years ago, with money she'd borrowed from people she shouldn't have borrowed from. I'd told her the numbers didn't work. She'd told me I didn't understand entrepreneurship. 6 months ago, the salon had closed. Last month, someone had broken the windshield of her car. The month before that, the lock on her front door had been changed while she was at the grocery store, and she'd had to call a locksmith to get back into her own house, except it turned out it wasn't her house anymore. "I've worked out an arrangement," she said. "These men represent?" I asked the older man directly. He looked at me for a moment, the way people look at something unexpected. "Harwick," he said, like that was a complete answer. I'd heard the name. Everyone in certain parts of Chicago had heard it, the way you hear about weather patterns. Something you don't choose to be involved with, but which involves you anyway if you're in its path. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," I said. Renata's face did something complicated. "Your parents left a life insurance policy. Small, not much. I've been using it to cover household costs since you were 9. I know," I said slowly. "You told me it ran out when I was 12. It didn't run out." The room went quiet. Outside, rain hit the windows in sheets. "How much is left?" I said. She told me. It was enough. It was more than enough to cover what she owed, if she'd touched it right then and cleared the debt. But she hadn't touched it. She'd let the interest compound because I understood this the way you understand something terrible all at once. She'd always intended to use me as the collateral, not the money. The money was her exit strategy if I didn't comply. I was the better offer. "They need someone to manage accounts," she said. "Internal bookkeeping. You're good at that." "It's not." She paused. "It's not anything dangerous. You're giving them me," I said, "to clear your debt. It's a job, Oddie. It's a transaction." I looked at the older man again. "She's trading me for the money she owes you." He didn't deny it. He didn't seem like a man who bothered with denial. "Mr. Harwick needs someone who can manage sensitive financial records, someone outside the organization. Your aunt indicated you had relevant skills and particular circumstances that make the arrangement." He chose his word carefully. "Practical, practical." I stood there with my coat still on, wet from the walk from the bus stop, and I thought about the notebook on the kitchen table. All those years of tallying me up. "And if I refuse?" I said. The younger man finally looked up from his phone. The older one said, "That would make things more complicated for your aunt. More complicated. A euphemism with enough room in it to fit whatever it needed to fit." I looked at Renata. She met my eyes for exactly 2 seconds before she looked away, and that was the moment I understood that she had never once, not in 17 years, seen me as anything other than a resource she was waiting to spend. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." She looked relieved. That was the worst part. Not the fear, not the anger, but the relief on her face, clean and immediate, the way you look when a transaction clears. They took me that same night. "1 bag," the older man said. I packed efficiently. I'd always packed efficiently, the habit of someone who knew that whatever space she occupied could be revoked without warning. I didn't say goodbye to Renata. She was already on the phone when I walked past the kitchen. The car was black, expensive, with tinted windows and no conversation. The younger man drove. The older one sat beside me and answered exactly none of my questions, which were several and pointed. After the third one went unanswered, I stopped asking and watched Chicago slide past the windows in the rain. We drove for 40 minutes to a part of the city I didn't know well. Industrial, quiet, the kind of blocks where no one walks at night because no one has reason to be there at night. The building we pulled up to looked like a converted warehouse, except the security on it was not the kind warehouses usually have. Inside, it was different. Not lavish. I'd expected lavish from the car, from the suits. But it was precise. Everything had a place. The floors were poured concrete, sealed dark. The walls held shelving units of binders, filing systems, equipment I recognized as financial hardware. It looked, more than anything, like the back office of a very serious accounting firm that had decided to locate itself somewhere no one would find it. A woman at a desk took my name, gave me a badge, and walked me down a hallway without explaining where we were going. We stopped in front of a door. "He'll see you," she said, and knocked once. I didn't know what I expected. Something cinematic, maybe. A large desk, a man silhouetted against a window. What I got was a man standing at a standing desk, sleeves rolled to the elbows, reading something on a screen. He didn't look up when we came in. "Sit," he said. I sat. The woman left, closing the door. He finished whatever he was reading, then turned around. His name was Harwick. I didn't learn his first name until much later, and even then it took effort to use it. He was taller than I'd imagined, which is a strange thing to say about someone you hadn't imagined at all until an hour ago. Mid-40s, I guessed. Dark hair going silver at the temples. There was a scar along his jaw, a thin one, old enough to have gone pale. His eyes were the color of deep water in the kind of lake you can't see the bottom of. He looked at me the way the older man had, like I was something that had shown up and needed to be assessed before anything else could happen. "You keep books," he said. "Yes. What did you manage?" 3 locations for a dry cleaning chain. Payroll, accounts payable and receivable, reconciliation. I caught 2 years of inventory fraud that the previous bookkeeper had buried in vendor invoices. He was quiet for a moment. "How?" The unit costs per pound of solvent didn't match the regional supplier averages. The discrepancy was small enough per transaction that it looked like normal variance, but over 24 months it compounded to about $11,000. "You caught it?" I reported it. They thanked me and let me go. Something almost moved in his face. "So you're accurate and you're unlucky. I prefer to think of it as accurate and underemployed." He looked at me for a moment. Then, "I'm going to be clear with you, because I find that pretending is expensive. You're here because your aunt owed me money and you were her solution. I didn't request you specifically. What I requested was someone competent, outside the network, with nothing to lose and specific skills." He paused. "Are you afraid of me?" "I'm afraid of the situation," I said. "I don't know enough about you yet to be afraid of you specifically. That's an honest answer." "I find that pretending is expensive," I said. He was quiet again. Then he said, "You'll start in the morning. Marcus will show you to a room. You're not a prisoner. You can leave the building with an escort during reasonable hours." You will not discuss what you see here with anyone outside this building. You will be compensated. When the arrangement concludes, you'll be returned to wherever you want to go. When does it conclude? When I decide it does. I should have pushed back on that. I didn't. Something told me, and I've learned to trust those quiet, cold instincts, that pushing back right now would close a door that was better left open. What are the accounts? I said. He almost smiled. Not quite. It didn't reach far enough to count, but the possibility moved across his face and then retreated. We'll begin with the import documentation, he said. There are inconsistencies I want resolved. My previous bookkeeper retired. Retired was a word with several possible meanings in this context. I decided not to ask which one. The room they gave me was small, clean, and had a lock on the inside that I used that first night and then every night after. The bed was better than the one I'd had at Renata's. The window faced a courtyard, and in the mornings there was light in it. I started on the accounts the next day. They were, in a word, a disaster. Not fraudulent, or not obviously fraudulent, which was the more troubling possibility, but chaotic, as if several different people had been doing the books at different times with different systems, and no one had ever reconciled the versions against each other. Import logs didn't match payment records. Certain vendor accounts appeared in 2 separate ledgers, under slightly different names. 3 months of payroll had been processed manually, in a way that wouldn't survive even a cursory audit. I started at the beginning. I always start at the beginning. You don't solve a balance problem from the middle. Harwick came by the second afternoon to stand in the doorway and watch me work. I was aware of him the way you're aware of weather, a pressure change, a shift in the quality of the room. You reorganized the filing system, he said. Your previous system had vendor files organized by first contact date. That's not useful. I reorganized by category and then by frequency of transaction. I didn't ask you to do that, I know. It was inefficient. He was quiet for a moment. I kept working. What do you see so far? He said. 2 vendors are ghosts, I said. The paperwork exists, the payments went out. But if you cross-reference the shipping manifests, nothing arrived. Someone was skimming through dummy invoices. How much? I'll know exactly by Thursday. Rough estimate, somewhere between 40 and 60,000 over 18 months. He was quiet again, for longer this time. My previous bookkeeper retired, he said again, and this time it sounded different. Right, I said. He missed it, yes, and you found it in 2 days. I hadn't looked at the shipping manifests before today. If I had, it would have been 1 day. He left without saying anything else. I didn't know then whether that was good or bad. I knew later. But that second day, I just went back to the numbers and let them tell me what they needed to tell me. 3 weeks in, I had rebuilt the accounting system from the ground up. The ghost vendors were identified. 2 names, one inside the organization and one outside, working together, which Harwick dealt with in ways I wasn't told about and didn't ask about. The payroll reconciled. The import documentation, once properly cross-referenced, revealed a pattern of overpayment to 3 suppliers that was either sloppy negotiation or a kickback arrangement. I presented all of it in a clean report, printed, with a summary page and a full appendix. Harwick read it across the table from me while I sat waiting. He read the whole thing, not skimming, actually reading. I could tell because his eyes moved at the right pace, and twice he went back to an earlier page. When he finished, he put it down. How much was the overpayment? Annual impact of approximately 230,000. If it's renegotiated immediately, you recover that going forward. You can't reclaim what's already gone, but the supplier contracts come up for renewal in Q2. Can you write the renegotiation terms? That's not really bookkeeping. Can you do it? Yes, I said. He nodded. And then he said something that surprised me. You could have kept the ghost vendor discrepancy to yourself. Used it as leverage. I looked at him. That would have been stupid. Most people would have tried it. Most people don't understand that leverage only works if the other person doesn't see it coming. You would have seen it coming. You see most things coming. That's obvious. Using it against you would have been a liability, not an asset. I paused. Besides, I'm not here to steal from you. I'm here because my aunt sold me to clear a debt. Those aren't the same moral situation." He looked at me for a long moment. The scar along his jaw caught the light. "No," he said quietly, "they're not. I learned the shape of the organization slowly, the way you learn the layout of a house by living in it, not from a map but from the daily movement of people, the rooms that were always occupied, the ones that went quiet after certain conversations. Harwick's operation was not what I would have called a criminal enterprise in the cinematic sense. It was a business, an old one, with roots in the shipping and import corridors that had run through Chicago since before either of us was born. It moved things. It managed relationships between people who couldn't formalize those relationships on paper. It collected, maintained, and occasionally called in debts. The violence was there. I wasn't naive enough to miss it, but it was precise. Not random, not theatrical. It happened when the ledger required it to happen, and then it stopped. Harwick was the most rigidly methodical person I had ever met, including every accountant I had ever worked alongside, and I had worked alongside several. What I didn't expect was that he would start talking to me. Not about himself, not at first, about the work. He would come by the office I'd claimed for myself in the third week, and he would stand in the doorway, and he would ask about a specific account or a specific decision, and the conversation would begin there. But conversations, I've found, don't always stay where they begin. He'd grown up in this. I understood that from context, from the way he referred to certain old accounts as if they were family heirlooms. His father had built the import network. His father had also, in his later years, made decisions that had cost the organization significantly, and Harwick had spent 10 years repairing the damage. Quietly, without announcement, the way you close holes in a hull below the waterline before the water gets in. He didn't tell me this directly. I assembled it from the edges. He started asking me to stay when he was reviewing the supplier contracts, then to sit in when he met with certain account representatives. Not to speak, just to be there, with the numbers in my head, in case he needed to know something immediately. I remember the first time he checked something with me in the room with other people present, a question about a freight cost per unit from 8 months ago. He glanced at me across the table, not breaking his conversation, just a look. 4780, I said quietly. He nodded and kept talking. The men across the table looked at me like I'd appeared from somewhere. He asked me once, coming up on 2 months, whether I thought what he did was wrong. We were in the common room, not a formal meeting, just late evening, the building quieter than usual. I was eating something from the kitchen. He was drinking coffee, standing, the way he always stood even when there were chairs. "That's a complicated question," I said. "I'd like a complicated answer then." I thought about it. The system you operate in exists because legitimate systems left space for it. The shipping routes, the debt arrangements, those fill gaps that legal structures don't cover for people who can't access legal structures. That doesn't make it moral. It makes it functional. I looked at him. I don't think you're wrong in a simple way, but I also don't think the people who get hurt by it think about gaps in legitimate systems when they're getting hurt. He was quiet. "You asked," I said. "I did," he said. "I wasn't expecting a structural analysis." "You should have been," I said. "It's what I do." He almost smiled again. This time it got a little further. Month 3. I stopped locking my door at night, not from carelessness, but because the threat had shifted in my mind from the building to the world outside it. Something had changed about the geometry of the place, where the safety was. I told myself it was rational. Maybe it was. What was harder to explain rationally was the way I'd started paying attention to him. Not professionally, though professionally I was already paying more attention to him than to anyone else in the building. But the way you pay attention to a sound you haven't identified yet. The way his voice changed register when he was thinking through something difficult versus when he'd already decided. The way the scar on his jaw was from a knife, and he'd told me this once, not as a confession but as a correction when I'd asked if it was from glass. The fact that I'd asked at all. He noticed too. I think he noticed before I did, which is annoying to admit. It happened without announcement. Most real things do. One evening I was cross-referencing a supplier audit, and he came to stand behind me to look at the screen and said something about the Q3 figures, and when I turned to answer, we were closer than we'd meant to be, and neither of us moved back. Odalys, he said. It was the first time he'd used my full name. He'd called me by my last name for 3 months, which I'd reciprocated. Harwick, I said. I'm going to ask you something, he said. I'm going to answer it, I said. That's generally how it works. This time the almost smile became an actual one, small, controlled, but real. It changed his face in a way I hadn't been prepared for. Have dinner with me, he said. Not in the building. I thought about it for a longer moment than necessary, which meant I'd already decided. My aunt sold me to you, I said. I want to be clear that I'm aware of that. I know you're aware of it. And this isn't. I paused. I'm not staying because I feel like I have to. I know, he said. Okay, I said. Dinner. I won't tell you it was simple after that. It wasn't. He was not a simple man, and I am not a simple woman, and the circumstances were not circumstances that lend themselves to simplicity. There were weeks that were easy, and weeks that weren't. There were things about his world that I had to decide, each time, whether I could stand beside. The violence I mentioned, precise, methodical, is still violence, and standing beside it means carrying a portion of it. I made those decisions with open eyes. I want that to be clear. What I can tell you is that he never treated me as a transaction. From the 3rd day onward, when I'd found what his previous bookkeeper had missed and told him the truth about it, instead of using it, something had shifted. A subtle recalibration. The way a scale adjusts when you put the right weight on it. He saw me as a person who was accurate and useful and honest, and then he saw me as something more than that, and in both cases, he saw me, that mattered. After Renata's kitchen table and that notebook, it mattered more than I know how to say. She called, eventually, 4 months in. The building had a phone I was allowed to use for personal calls, which I almost never did. Oddy, she said. Renata, I said, I wanted to check on you. I let the silence sit for a moment. You wanted to know if I was angry. She didn't answer that. She told me she was doing better, that she'd found a small job, a different apartment. She mentioned the insurance money, the account she'd kept from me for 17 years, in a sideways, oblique way, as if daring me to bring it up directly. I thought about what Harwick had told me the night before, about a debt he'd inherited from his father that had taken a decade to close, about what it costs to spend that long carrying something that was never yours. I'm doing well, I said. I'm not coming back. I want you to understand that. She started to say something about family. You had 17 years to act like family, I said. You kept a notebook. I hung up. Harwick was in the doorway when I turned around. I don't know how long he'd been there. She called to see if I was angry, I said. Are you? I thought about it, honestly. No, I don't think so. I think I searched for the right word. Reconciled. He looked at me for a moment. That's more than most people get. I had better things to be angry about, I said. And then I had better things than that. What happened to Renata? I'll tell you. Because leaving it out would be cowardly. 2 weeks after the phone call, it came to Harwick's attention that Renata had borrowed again. Different lenders this time, lower level, the kind of people who operate in narrow margins and use blunt instruments. The debt was smaller, but the situation was uglier. He told me himself. Sat across from me at my desk and laid it out the way I lay out a financial summary, completely, without editorializing, and then waited. What are you going to do? I said. That depends on what you want. I thought about it for a long time. About 17 years. About the notebook. About the fact that she was still, technically, the only family I had, and what that means when family means very little. Clear her debt, I said. Once. Not because she deserves it. Because I don't want to spend the next 10 years thinking about what happened to her. He nodded. But I don't want her to know it came from me, I said. He looked at me. If she knows it came from me, I said, she'll think I forgave her. I haven't. I've made a practical decision. Those aren't the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you sound like me. I've been here 6 months, I said. It rubs off. The debt was cleared. Renata never knew where it came from. I made sure of that. She's still out there, somewhere. I don't check. I made a decision and I closed the account and I moved on. That's all I know how to do with something that doesn't balance. What I am now is harder to define than what I was. I am not Harwick's bookkeeper anymore, though I still manage certain accounts because I'm good at it, and because the chaos that preceded me was genuinely offensive to my sensibilities, and I refuse to let it lapse back into disorder. I am not a prisoner. I was never really a prisoner, even on the first night, though I didn't know that then. I am not a victim, though I was handed over like one. I am the woman who lives in this building and runs these accounts and sits beside this man at a table when things need to be decided and sometimes tells him things he doesn't want to hear, because I find that pretending is expensive and so does he, and that, between two people, turns out to be enough to build something on. He asked me once what I thought about the life. I think it suits me, I said. That's a complicated thing to admit. Why? Because I was supposed to be the victim in this story, I said. The girl who was sold. The one who survives and then finds something better elsewhere. And instead, I looked around the office. At the clean files, the reconciled ledgers, the window with morning light in it. Instead, I found that the place I was sold to was the first place that ever actually needed what I'm good at, I said. The first place that didn't fire me for telling the truth. He was quiet for a moment. That's a low bar, he said. It is, I said, but I cleared it, and then I raised it. He reached across the desk and put his hand over mine, briefly, the way he did things, without excess, without theater. You raised it considerably, he said. Outside, the city was going on without us, the way it always does. Traffic, weather, other people's lives stacking up and falling apart and rearranging themselves into new configurations. Somewhere across town, a woman named Renata was spending money she hadn't earned on things she didn't need, the way she always had. And here, in a building that didn't appear on any map, in an office I had made orderly from chaos, I sat beside the most dangerous man I had ever met and understood, quietly and without drama, that I was exactly where I had chosen to be, not where I was sent, where I chose. That distinction took everything I had to earn. I'll hold on to it for the rest of my life.